Hi there, I'm Stan Baker, one of the hosts of Circle Forum, along with Shelley Steele and Steve Young. This is part 2 of our conversation with Reg Klassen, Chief Superintendent of the Frontier School Division in Manitoba. We talked about a lot of things, and we could have kept talking about student attendance for a long time. So we're going to jump right back into this conversation with Reg, Steve, and me, Stan. It certainly sounds like investing, first of all, like you're really targeting a certain number of grades, like K to 3, in terms of getting the habit of going to school, investing in literacy in particular, but also the methodology that it be land-based. So if those are the kinds of things that are working in some communities, what's it going to take to spread that through 41 schools?
Quite a bit of work. One, we need to find people that have a knowledge of land-based education, and we have lots of resources in our community, but not everybody's willing to put that forth. The other thing is we have to remember when it comes to Indigenous, we have 3 focus areas: academics, student services and wellness, and Indigenous way of life. And when it comes to Indigenous way of life, we're always in a position of asking people to step forward and share that, who in many cases are elders, who in many cases have been told for a portion of their life, you can't talk about that, you can't share that. And so there's some of those hesitancies. But so that would be one thing, is to gather people, find the resources in community and move forward with that. We have a number of communities that have land-based education camps, which are pretty significant, where we take students to and do work with them. The other thing is that for those teachers who don't have an understanding of, or who are not Indigenous, or those teachers who are but haven't grown up in Indigenous community or haven't learned some of being Indigenous, there's a real hesitancy for people to teach in that way because they're afraid of making a mistake. And so we're okay about making a mistake, recognize it, and make changes. But we don't want to offend anybody, and that's not the intent. But we need to work at this. And there is a little bit of a need for a hurry up offense because time's a wasting, and we need to keep it moving and encouraging people to be involved in the possibilities of how we can do that. And I think, and I don't want to limit us to my own thoughts and ideas about how those classrooms could work. I think it's a wide variety of possibilities based on each community and the knowledge that they have and the people that are there. And when our young people see that the people in the community are part of that education, that in itself will already make education more important.
I'd love to get back to something else you mentioned about fear of making mistakes. One of the things that has drawn me to restorative practices is that when things aren't working well, that there's a way to address the mistake or the harm. But it's almost like we have to teach people to make mistakes and how to learn from them. Because we say this in our classrooms too. Kids, in math, it's okay to make a mistake because you learn from your mistakes. But we haven't really applied that.
No, and that brings us into assessment and the wrong ways of doing assessment when children pay dearly for making a mistake. So I'm not letting you know anything until I'm sure I got this right. I'm not putting up my hand if I'm not absolutely confident. And we do that, and we encourage people to do and correct the mistakes as we go and learn from that. But yet we as educators have some difficulty with that, because if we do push forward and there is a mistake, we hear about it pretty harshly from those critics, all the armchair educators on the side, which is everybody who's not in the school. It's a little bit human nature. I understand that. But that ability, that courage to step out and try something and tweak it when it doesn't quite work the way that you want it. But if we do that alone, that's difficult. I think that we don't talk about possibility enough for example, as a staff in a school? What are the possibilities that we could do with education? And part of what keeps us from doing that is time, because as you well know, in school, it's a bit of a race trying to get everything done you've got planned for today, plus dealing with all the things that came to the door today that you weren't expecting to come to. And we don't intentionally give ourselves time to talk about the could be, or I'd like to try, or what do you think about this? We don't build those times in. And I think that as educators, when we're dealing with young children, I think we should do that. And in some ways, we should actually do a little bit more of that in class, asking our students.
I was going to ask because you brought up the idea of public critics. To what extent is the reluctance to share attendance information with our communities also getting in the way of sharing the responsibility for educating kids?
I would say that the fear of sharing attendance information is it looks bad on us. So if I share with you our attendance information, some of which isn't very good, there is the immediate thought that we're not doing our job. And I'm not going to say that's absolutely wrong. That might be true, but that's hard to take. And so I think this notion of a wall around the school that you actually need almost special permission to get into because you have to register at the front desk, it's just trust it, what's going on, it's all good. This is the learning center, this is the hub. And yet I think we need to tear those things down and be more open, which comes with a lot of risks because it leaves you vulnerable. It means that parents come in and have conversations. But yeah, I think sitting down with parents and asking them at the beginning of a school year, tell me about your child. What do I need to know about your child? Would be an interesting way to start the year, as opposed to bringing the child in and having the parents sit outside and we'll assess them so that we have a benchmark, which is also important. Or visiting homes and watching children in another setting. I remember as a principal, we had a grade 8 camping trip that at the end of the year, students went, and as teachers were prone to do back in the day, oh, their grades aren't high enough. They've been in trouble. They can't go. And I just remember that I was that kid. I was that kid who didn't have enough grades and wasn't in serious trouble, but I was a prankster. And so I was always on the verge of not going, and going was always a big deal. And so I just, as a principal, took a hard line. Everybody goes. And I've done the same in this school division. There is no way that you're going to have a field trip at the end of the year and based on attendance, kids can go or not go. That's insane to me. So everybody goes. And there was this one kid that the staff really pushed on me. And I said, no, we're taking him. They said, are you going on the trip? I was the principal. I said, yeah, I'll go on the trip. I got no problem with that. I got to go on a trip with somebody. So I'll go with the grade 8. Turns out, model camper. Didn't want to do book learning to save his life, but when he got out there, he helped everybody set up tents, build fires. He was by far head and shoulders above everybody else as a leader. And it's always amazing when we get children into these settings that are different than this classroom structure, which is so narrow and so finite. And our universities continue to pigeonhole kids with marks.
How do you have those conversations with the naysayers?
I think that's it. You start with the conversations and you have lots of them and you keep on talking. In my past position of superintendent in a school division, we had a number of schools that had multi-age classrooms. And I don't like multi-grade. I like multi-age because even a class of the same age group of students gives you multi learning styles and multi levels. And so every classroom, in a sense, is a multi level, whether it be age or learning styles or both. And so we did some research and we looked at multi-grade classrooms, multi-age classrooms, and we tried to determine, given the research, a single grade classroom or a multi-age classroom with more than one grade in which did the students learn best? The research tells us that there is no difference. But what the research shows is that a multi-age, multi-grade classroom, actually, the empathy of students shoots up the chart. And so we started to make that move in schools that had single grade classrooms. Parents hated it. We tried to explain. We explained quite a bit. They hated it. And so we pushed pretty hard. We did a K-6 school that had 2 grades at every classroom, and we did that and moved lockers around. And after the first month, the principal came to me and he said, "This is amazing." He said, I can't believe it. There isn't a single student waiting in my office at the end of lunch." Because suddenly there weren't really clearly defined boundaries on the playground. This wasn't the grade 7 section or the grade 8 section. And moving lockers around in the school, I used to have 2 schools that I was principal of, and I did it easily in the second one. The first one, there was a band of grade 12 lockers, and it was like the gauntlet for the kids who didn't have a relative in that gauntlet. And so I said, "That's it. We're going to change it." So I gave 2 lockers throughout the school to the grade 12 teacher, spread it out, and everybody else was spread out. And all of that just dissolved. It just went away as we get to know other people. And we're not exclusive to the grade. And so I think there's parents who never forgave me because they were so locked into a single grade classroom. But in the end, their children were better off. But we have a lot of small schools where we have a lot of multi-age and multi-grade classrooms. And I think those kids are farther ahead. We have some very brilliant people that grew up across Canada in small one-room schoolhouses that have done quite well. And I think there's something to learn from that. There's really something to gather in from that. What is that? That is just different ways of talking and thinking. And so when you ask, how do we do that? I just think that it's constantly meeting, giving ourselves time. Often, and I'm guilty of this, we have a meeting with parents, okay, and then we tell it to them once and they're supposed to get it. We need to have more conversations about it. And time, of course, is always the enemy on these things as we try to explain. And if we took a bigger lesson from some of the elders that work in some of our schools where it's okay, we'll get there. Let's begin this conversation. Let me share with you what I know or what I'm thinking. And it just takes on a different tone. And I think we need to do that more often with each other. And yet our world is set up that our phones have to open up right away. We have to be able to text somebody. And how many times have you text somebody and they don't respond in 5 and you get, I'm married to this marvelous human being and she has a gift to live in the moment. I don't have that gift. I'm always on to the next thing. I'm Mr. Hurry Up. She makes every moment a good moment because she's there, she's present. And I've tried to learn that. And I think if we were to teach each other a little bit more of that, this moment here, let's be present and let's take advantage of this to gain deeper understanding of who we are and who the other is. I think would make significant difference in our world.
Really appreciate you being here, Reg, and thank you very much for joining us on our podcast.
Yes, thank you.
It's been my pleasure. It's been good. I really appreciate the chance to have the conversation. Thank you.
Reg Klassen emphasized the importance of involving community, particularly Indigenous elders and knowledge keepers, in the educational process, and the need for schools to be more welcoming to parents and community members. We discussed with Reg the hesitation among educators in schools to embrace new ideas due to a fear of making mistakes or facing criticism. Addressing student attendance is going to take a culture shift that encourages experimentation and learning from mistakes. Find out more about our work with restorative practices and changing school culture at www.restorative.ca. Email me, stan@restorative.ca. Embracing the knowledge of Indigenous elders and of land-based learning adds up to a needed culture shift in schools that will encourage all students to attend.